In this video, we're going to look at non-infectious disease, which is module 8, and in particular, we're going to look at the question, do non-infectious diseases cause more deaths than infectious diseases? Before we start, we'll just get some definitions out of the way. In this model, we have the whole population that has disease. So this blue box here is the population, and the people with the disease are the pebbles in the box. If we want to increase the number of people with disease, then we increase the incidence. So that's the number of new cases that arise with that disease in that population per year. The way that we reduce the number of people in the population is that they either die, that would be the mortality rate, or they get cured. So the number of people at any one time with the disease is known as the prevalence. So that's the number of people in a population with the disease. And you can see how we could add more pebbles or stones to the bucket faster than they're dying or being cured. That would increase the prevalence, and vice versa. Perhaps we could increase the cure rate, and that would decrease the prevalence. But the prevalence gives us an idea of the number of people in the population with the disease. That's also known as the burden of disease on a population. So just to summarise those definitions, the incidence is the number of new cases of the disease over a specific time, usually a year. It's usually expressed as a number per 100,000 of the population. The mortality rate is the number of deaths in a year per 100,000 of the population, and the prevalence is the number of people in a population who've been diagnosed, they have the disease, but they're still alive by the time you finish counting them. And you can see how it's important to look at the balance of these numbers when you look at the data here. We're only going to look at the top two diseases. We're going to look at lung cancer and breast cancer. And you will notice from this blue line here that the incidence rate for both of these cancers is approximately the same. And it's actually the same on this graph here, which has got a slightly different scale, but the number is still around 2 million new cases per year across the world. And what's interesting is the green line is very big for breast cancer. What does the green line show? The green line is showing prevalence. That's the number of people in the population that have that disease and are still alive. Why would the green line be so much bigger for breast cancer? Well, when we come down and have a look at this graph here, you'll notice there's a difference in the red lines. Breast cancer's red line is really low, and lung cancer's red line is really high, and the red line is indicating mortality rate. So more people die each year from lung cancer than they do from breast cancer, and that is why there are more people alive with breast cancer than there are with lung cancer. So that's where those three words are really important, that you understand the difference and their interaction. So let's have a think about non-infectious diseases. They're not caused by a pathogen, cannot pass them from person to person in a contagious way. That's why we also call them non-communicable. It's a huge range. You can categorise them in all different ways. But what's really important for our inquiry question is that they do cause more deaths than infectious diseases in all the countries around, pretty much all the countries around the world. So let's have a look at some data about that. Here's some data about Australia's death rate. What causes Australians to die? The size of the circle indicates the size of the number. So our biggest killer is non-communicable diseases. In other words, non-infectious diseases. And there are lots of different categories here, but the biggest ones are malignant cancers and cardiovascular diseases. Compared to communicable diseases, that's this area over here, we've got 150,000 people a year dying from non-infectious, but only about 7,000 dying from infectious diseases. And over here, we've got injuries. Let's compare this data to other countries. So same colours, different countries. We've got Brazil, Japan, and Ecuador. Try to pick 3 countries that you will have heard of, but also you'll be aware that they have different socio-economic backgrounds. But look at the pattern, it's still the same. Non-communicable diseases, non-infectious diseases is the largest circle on every page. And infectious diseases is smaller, but you'll see in Ecuador, infectious diseases is larger than the infectious disease rate in Brazil and in Japan. Very few people dying compared to the total number dying. So still the same pattern, non-infectious diseases causing more deaths in countries around the world. Back to Australia. If you have a look at this, pause it for a moment and see what you think. So this is all about the underlying causes of death by age group in 2019 to 2021. And if we have a look at, with specific eye on, is it infectious or non-infectious that's causing people to die? If you look at the top reason that cause people to die in all age categories, they are all non-infectious. The only time that we see infectious things coming in to the top 5 is in the over 95s with influenza and pneumonia. There are no other infectious diseases, except perhaps in these ill-defined causes. And when you go into the data about this, it gives some definition about that. And possibly sudden infant death syndrome, but again, it's difficult to categorize exactly what's causing those diseases. So non-infectious diseases are the biggest killers in Australia. So let's have a look at some individual types of non-infectious diseases. And for our syllabus, we need to look at 4 categories. And as I said before, there are many different ways you can categorize non-infectious diseases. So inherited or genetic diseases. Here are 2 examples that you might remember. So sickle cell anemia, Down syndrome. Sickle cell anemia is caused by a single point mutation in the gene that codes for the protein hemoglobin. As a consequence, there's a change in the shape of the red blood cell, and that has lots of knock-on effects in the body. Less oxygen's carried, lots of painful sickle trait moments where red blood cells get trapped in the capillaries and cause pain. Down syndrome, caused by a mutation in chromosome numbers, so you get an extra chromosome. Again, a genetic imbalance, lots of physical symptoms. Nutritional diseases. These are caused by deficiencies in both macro and micronutrients. Macronutrients would be either malnutrition, so undernutrition, or overnutrition, maybe obesity. But here are some examples of some micronutrient deficiencies. Scurvy, a lack of vitamin C, and iron deficiency means that you can't make your hemoglobin correctly, as well as some other enzymes, and that can result in anemia or fatigue. Cancer is a whole category of, we've missed one, there we go, diseases caused by environmental exposure. Before we get on to cancer, this can be all sorts of environmental exposure. You'll be very familiar with UV rays causing skin cancer and things like that, but I thought I'd pick up on a couple of things here. One is mesothelioma, which is a disease which results from being exposed to asbestos. And that's an Australian problem because lots of asbestos was used in buildings over the years. And radiation sickness. So radiation sickness caused by exposure to the fallout from maybe a nuclear attack or a failed nuclear power plant, like when Fukushima in Japan was hit by the tsunami and released a lot of radiation. So symptoms, damages DNA, causes many, many symptoms. So back to cancer. Cancer is a term which collects together a whole load of diseases, and they're characterized by having something in common, and that is that you get rapid mitosis in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cells that are produced by that mitosis don't differentiate correctly. They may not specialize at all, or they may specialize into the wrong thing. They can invade cells that are nearby, space that's nearby, and cause a lump, or they may break off and spread through the lymph or through the blood to other organs around the body. Here's a diagrammatic representation of that. We've got normal cells. there may be a change in the genetics causing abnormal cells. So you can see those here. And then those abnormal cells have forgotten how to hold their place. So they just divide uncontrollably in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you end up with a lump, and that lump may invade neighboring tissues, or cells may break off and go and lodge themselves in new places around the body and grow new growths around the body. And cancerous lumps actually can make their own blood supply. So you can see here blood vessels being brought into the dividing mass of cells. So the key thing about cancer is there are many categories of cancer, and they can be triggered by many things. So partly it can start with your own genetics, but you can also get triggered by physical factors. Carcinogens, in other words, a cancer-causing agent like ultraviolet light or ionizing radiation. Chemical factors like asbestos, that's what mesothelioma results, is a cancer resulting from asbestos exposure. Tobacco smoke, so benzene in tobacco smoke, for example. Alcohol, unhealthy diet. And then there are also biological things, viruses like HPV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, Epstein-Barr virus, HIV, bacteria like Helicobacter pylori and other parasites. They can all trigger cancerous changes. And the older you get, the more likely you are to get a cancer, because you get an accumulation of all of these factors. And as you get older, you've had more chance for specific cancers to start in your body. But we can prevent cancers. We can reduce our exposure to risk. We can vaccinate against certain viruses, and we can screen for bacteria exposure as well. And we can also make sure that we participate in early detection screening and diagnosis and treatment. So the earlier you can catch a cancer, the more likely you are to cure it. So when you think about, do non-infectious diseases cause more deaths than infectious diseases? The answer is yes. And there is lots of evidence to back that up, although in different countries the exact disease that causes death may change, and it will also change depending on whether you're male or female, and it will change depending on your age category too.